Once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight, we are going to hear from author Susannah Marren about her new book, A Palm Beach Scandal. It is a second novel in her Palm Beach series. And let's learn a little bit about Susannah first before I turn the program over to her. So, Susannah Marren is also known as Susan Shapiro Barash. She is the writer of 13 nonfiction women's issue books and fiction under her pen name, Susannah Marren. She has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, the Chicago Tribune, Elle, Marie Claire, and has appeared on national television, including The Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS, CNN, MSNBC. Barash has been a guest on national radio programs, including NPR and Sirius Radio. And her speaker appearances include Bayer Diagnostics, UBS, United Way, and so many more. Her nonfiction books, so in case you enjoy her fiction books, you may want to check out some of her nonfiction as well. Her titles include Tripping the Prom Queen, Toxic Friends, and The 9 Phases of Marriage. Her novels, Between the Tides, A Palm Beach Wife, and now A Palm Beach Scandal, we're about to learn about. So without further ado, I'd love to turn the program over to our guest tonight, Susannah Marren. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm really happy to be here. And I know that Camden, Maine is a very beautiful place. And that really is a great segue into my novel, A Palm Beach Scandal. To me, as a gender professor for over 20 years at Marymount Manhattan College, based on my research for my nonfiction books, there's nothing more fascinating than faces women wear versus how they really feel. And so I have long looked into the role of wife, the role of sister, mothers, daughters, mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law, female friendship, female infidelity, the price of being the good girl, and the secrets that women keep. For my nonfiction books, I've interviewed thousands of women all across the country. Per book, usually between 200 and 400 women. A diverse group of women in terms of age, ethnicity, social strata, religion, and where they live. You know, big cities, rural towns, small places, suburbs. The late author, Toni Morrison, is quoted saying, if there's a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, you should be the one to write it. And I would agree, since every one of my nonfiction books has been a topic that really intrigues me in terms of how contemporary women navigate a path in America. And so one of the first studies that I did was on mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law. And there is a mother-in-law character in A Palm Beach Scandal. So doing that study on mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law was very important to me because I, in fact, could not find a book in the bookstore and I needed to know. That was when I was a very young bride. By the time I had 3 children and the same mother-in-law, I knew I had to do that study. And so in my work as a nonfiction writer, I've written several books on the role of wife, and I've questioned why we hold the bar so high, why women expect so much in their marriages, and why they're often really disappointed. I also did a study on second wives. I researched how women feel about female rivalry, marriage, divorce, remarriage, why we lie and have secrets, how many of us sleepwalk through life when it comes to careers, marriage, and what it is that we really want. After all, sleepwalking is often really easier for women than facing ourselves and the situation. I've learned through my studies that a majority of women living in different parts of the country, as I mentioned, feel scrutinized by friends, judged by neighbors, family members, and held to a standard. If you're unhappily married or hate your mother-in-law or argue with your own mother, it hardly matters whether you've earned an MBA from Harvard or you didn't finish high school. If you struggle with a daughter or a teenage daughter or a granddaughter, it doesn't matter if you live in the East Coast or the Southwest. These are all emotional issues for women. And so this brings us to A Palm Beach Scandal, and the first in the series, which is called A Palm Beach Wife. And I chose very purposely the place, Palm Beach, because in a capitalistic, materialistic society, it's particularly interesting to me that the emotional issues for women, the secrets that we keep, the role of wife, of sister, of mother-in-law, are more put to the test. These roles are put to the test because we are told by our mentors, our mothers, the culture at large, advertisers, that if we achieve a great deal, if we have a material life, if we live in a beautiful place, that we will be happy, that is automatic happiness. But in fact, there are so many feelings for women that lurk beneath. And women are so facile at keeping secrets because they do not want to be judged. And so while this novel is, I believe, a very good beach read, it's also a novel that examines the prescribed roles for women and what a long buried secret will do to a family. So when A Palm Beach Wife, the first of the Palm Beach novels, came out in the spring of 2019, and I was asked about this particular locale, I talked a lot about how environment influences us, as I just mentioned, and it affects our behavior. It even dictates our goals, particularly for women. I have been coming to Palm Beach since I was a little girl. My mother, who was from Brooklyn before it was cool, never had seen a place like Palm Beach. She married my father and I grew up on the Jersey Shore, but my father was a ranked amateur tennis player for decades. And that's how they got to Palm Beach. They had friends there, and then my father got ranked in Florida. And so they were really invited in to a group of, parties and tennis matches and events that they might not have otherwise been included in. And my mother had a love affair with Palm Beach since I was very small. In fact, they became residents like the day I left for college. So since I've long been intrigued by the faces women wear versus how they really feel, I would be in Palm Beach, whether I was 20, 30, 40, 50 onward, with my mother. And I was really impressed with how much agency women of all ages have in Palm Beach. I don't think that's true in all places. I can tell you with great certainty, it's not the case in New York City. Women of a certain age become almost invisible. And it's certainly true in LA. But in Palm Beach, my mother and her group of friends and the women about town walking along Worth Avenue, which is the Rodeo Drive of Palm Beach, really had a lot of agency. Clothes, jewels, handbags, parties, clubs, places to be seen. It all mattered to them, and there were definitely elite circles. So my question as a gender professor and as someone who has written the nonfiction studies on how women truly feel, my question was, what lurks beneath in this really beautiful place? And why is it that women have such skills at covering it up? And that it doesn't mean that you have to be in Palm Beach to do well at hiding your deepest secrets or feel measured as a wife, a sister, a mother, a grandmother, a friend. But these emotional issues that I mentioned affect women everywhere. But in such a rarefied place, the higher you rise, the harder you fall. And that brings us to the actual story. I'm interested in multi-generational stories. I very much wanted the mother of these two adult daughters to have a real, substantial role in this novel. And so the novel is about two sisters. One is named Elodie and the other is named Aubrey. They are 8 years apart and Elodie is 40 years old. I'm very interested in family systems as well. Birth order and the way we're raised by the same set of parents could be completely different. And of course, endlessly interested in sisters, since I myself have two daughters and a son. And one of my nonfiction studies that I didn't mention before is called You're Grounded Forever, but first let's go shopping. And I interviewed women with 3-year-old daughters to over 30-year-old daughters, to see how they viewed their roles as mothers and what they did differently for their daughters and their sons if they had both sex children. So I took this story, a Palm Beach scandal, and I tell it in the voice of both Aubrey and Elodie. Elodie is the older daughter. She's done everything the right way. She's what I would call a perfect daughter, a good girl, a pleaser. She went to the right schools. She married a very eligible man. They are an it couple in Palm Beach. She runs the fictive Palm Beach Literary Society. And she runs the programming there for the speakers and the authors and poets. And everything about her life is just wonderful, except she doesn't have a child. And at the beginning of the book, no spoiler here, but I just want to tell you that the inciting incident of this novel is that she cannot try anymore after she miscarries. Her sister Elodie is as different as she can be from Elodie rather. Aubrey is in the music industry. She's not living in Palm Beach, she's living in Miami in South Beach. She has a hip boyfriend and she herself is pretty hip. And she really doesn't want to be sucked into the culture of Palm Beach. They were raised there and they started in New York, ended up in Palm Beach, and Aubrey is resisting her mother's dream that she'll come home. So when Elodie asks Aubrey to carry her child at her husband's behest, really James, the husband. And I just want to interrupt myself to say, I'm really fascinated by the role of wife. I had told you that before, but how much do we sacrifice as wives, as mothers? Where do we lose ourselves? Where do we have our own voice? And so for Elodie, although she doesn't really like her husband's idea, and she's very uncomfortable asking Aubrey, her husband really pressures her, and he tells her very early on in the book, again, no spoiler, he can't live without a child. He must have his own child. And so she's pressured in a way that seems incredibly unfair. And so once Aubrey decides to have the baby, we're really off to the races, because everything about Veronica, the mother, and Simon, the father, Aubrey and Elodie, everything about them is tested by this tremendous ask of Elodie and the result of Aubrey saying yes. I'm looking at a lot of themes in this novel, and one of them is definitely women often don't really know who they are until times of great sorrow or great joy. I had written a book many years ago, a nonfiction book called Reclaiming Ourselves, How Women Dispel a Legacy of Bad Choices. And in that, I interviewed hundreds of women about how they woke up and ended up really reclaiming their lives, often out of dire necessity. So I'm looking at women as survivors, women as acrobats, and what we give up of ourselves to fit into a family. There's also an aspect of female rivalry, and as I mentioned before, tremendous judgments. So when Elodie takes a look at her friends with whom she grew up in Palm Beach, and she sees that they have their little children, they bring them to the Palm Beach Literary Society for the reading hour, and she sees this, she isn't certain, and this is a big question for me of women in contemporary culture. Does she long for a baby because everyone else has a baby, a child, and she's being told that this is necessary to be complete? Or is she a woman, and there are many of them, who say, I'm okay if I don't have a child? How personal is this decision, and how much is it put upon her by James, her husband, her mother and father, who say to her at one point, well, we'd love to have a grandchild. Many of our friends do. So what does competition do to us? What is inherent within us in terms of longing? And what is the societal prescription of what we must have, that we must have to be complete? And then I'm also looking at the mother-daughter relationship. Mothering daughters today is more complex and lasts for a much longer time than ever before. And so I'm really looking at what we do with these relationships, because Veronica, as a mother to two adult daughters, is really feeling some relief. She's worked for a fictive charity in the novel called Mothers and Children, and she's worked very hard, and now she can really be with her husband, and her daughters are kind of spun. They're out in the world, they're adults, except this situation so triangulates the mother and her daughters. Both daughters are saying, choose my side in the very beginning. And then, of course, because although I wrote, as I mentioned, a book on female infidelity, the most incendiary nonfiction book I ever wrote is my study on why women keep secrets and lie for the cause, and why we can't always be honest about how we feel in so many ways, big secrets, small secrets, but why we feel we need to do that. And so there's tremendous concern about a family secret that gets uncovered in the course of this story, and what that does also to each of the characters. There are a few themes in the novel that I would like to mention. I think that women are typecast very early in their lives. This is reflective of my research for two nonfiction books. One is called Tripping the Prom Queen, The Truth About Women in Rivalry. And the other is a book called Toxic Friends, The Antidote for Women Stuck in Complicated Friendships. And in both those studies, I really am taking a look at how women are pegged so early in their lives. And for anyone, watching tonight, we can all think about what kind of young girl we were. Were we the brainy one, the athlete, the popular one, the leader of the pack, the misery lover who listened to her friends' woes without ever speaking up? And what does that do to us? How do we shed those labels, and what do we absorb about ourselves? So these sisters and their mother and the mother-in-law, Mimi, James's mother, who thinks her son is just perfect, and how Elodie has to really sort through that because she feels she's really failed everyone with her miscarriages. So what is the price that we pay for being labeled? Elodie is the perfect daughter, the achiever, except she struggles. And Aubrey has been excused. She's 8 years younger. Maybe her parents got tired, but she hasn't been as pressured to achieve. And so another theme in this novel is the dangerous element of being an impeccable wife or an ideal mother. How can that really be? How can it be that, again, the bar is raised so high here for women as wives? Why are we so measured? And for Veronica Cutler, the mother of Elodie and Aubrey, there's been great energy put forth to appear a certain way. She is actually a great actress. And then another theme, what is it about women that makes their tales so convincing and their realities often a fiction? And how effective is it to keep a secret? And so I look at that in writing this novel. And then another theme, the price of escape. It's so steep and it comes at a great risk, and that's particularly true in Palm Beach. Another theme, the mother-daughter bond, an ongoing fascination for me, as I mentioned, and why are we so entwined with our daughters? And in my nonfiction research, I found that the mothers and daughters with whom I spoke said that 90% felt that they were raising their daughters in a more challenging circumstance than their son. And then I circle back to the role of wife. I look at Elodie as a wife. I look at Aubrey, who chooses to be single. And I look at Veronica. And the idea of love, what is love? Love for our children, love for our spouses, love for our siblings, and what do we safeguard? And is it hierarchical? Is there a hierarchy to our love? Because I don't know if you remember, but many years ago, a writer named Eilert Waldman, a novelist, wrote a piece, and I'm not sure where it ran, maybe the New York Times or the New Yorker. She's married to Michael Chabon, the novelist, and she wrote and she said that she loved her children more than her husband. And there was a lot of pushback. And she went on Oprah to talk about it. And that reflects a cultural message. We are taught to put our children first. And so I'm also looking at child-centric marriages, such as the Cutlers have had, Veronica and Simon Cutler, the parents. And when can you shift to couple-centric marriages? When is that allowed? So I'm looking at marriage in many ways. And then I wanted to talk, I'm looking at the time because, we'll see who has questions, but I also wanted to speak about the fact that this is my third novel, and I've been on a virtual book tour for it. And for the first two novels and for all of my nonfiction, I've been on real book tours, and I've been all over the country. And with the nonfiction, it's a study, and I have a hunch. Like when I wrote my book called The New Wife, The Evolving Role of the American Wife, I wanted to look at the 5 decades from the 50s to 2000 to the millennium, and to look at the changing attitudes and what remains the same. I had a hunch, I did my research, I came to a conclusion. With my fiction, which is such a different way of reporting about women, I am now starting to be asked about my surprise endings. So I just wanted to explain that my novels have surprise endings because I have learned based on my nonfiction that as good a girl as we are, as faithful as we can be as daughters, mothers, friends, mothers-in-law, sisters, we never can really control what happens. We do our best, but life throws some punches. And as I said before, women are really survivors. So the surprise endings really indicate how it is for women so many times. And so that's really, what this novel is about and how my nonfiction really informs my fiction.
Thank you so much, Susannah. So I want to give an opportunity for folks who are in the audience to ask Susannah some questions as well. You may type them into the chat box, or if you would like to be unmuted and ask them aloud, you can go ahead and write in the chat box that you'd like me to unmute you, and I will. And while we wait to see if there's any questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you a couple things. So first of all, I mentioned to you right before we came on that I'm from Miami Beach, so I'm familiar with Palm Beach. And I think it is a fascinating culture, and so I think it's really interesting that you chose that destination. And I appreciated hearing your backstory about your history in Palm Beach. And so but one of the things I wanted to ask you about is legacy. So you mentioned, the weight that women carry, and you mentioned that James saying something as heavy as, I wouldn't be able to live without having a child. In these elite families, legacy is so important. Making sure your children go to the same schools that you went to, and carrying on the family name and all of that. Can you talk about the role that legacy did or did not play as you developed, especially the male characters in this book?
Well, I really appreciate the question. I'm very interested in legacy, and I'm very interested in family values. And then, of course, what is an imprimatur? So in fact, because before I write my novels, I know the beginning, the end, I have to work out how to get there, and I know the characters very well. So Elodie went to Princeton. Her father, Simon, went to Princeton. It really mattered to him that she did, and she did. And James is just an Ivy League cat. He's handsome, he has made money, he has a lot of power. And so your question really reminds me of something important that I didn't mention, and that is something else that really intrigues me, and that is male supremacy in a patriarchal society. And there are great gains for women now, and it's really impressive. But there's not equal pay for equal work. And it's still a patriarchy, and it will be. We live in a patriarchy and we'll die in a patriarchy. And so a voice for women it's very hard for women to have as much agency in many cases. And that does have to do with female decisions in this, the woman's decision in as a daughter and as a wife. And so Elodie is very pressured. Again, I don't want to give away the novel, but Elodie is pressured by the Palm Beach culture at large, by the competition and rivalry that we just have. You don't have to be in Palm Beach to be in competition with your friends. Oh, I'm pregnant. Oh, I am too. Oh, I failed. I'm not. Or, in terms of who you marry, that you're married. And Aubrey has really opted out. But it doesn't mean that Aubrey isn't aware. She might have left for South Beach, but there's nothing that she's missed in the memo. And this really does happen. And families of privilege take it more seriously, but I've interviewed such a diverse group of women, Julia, for my nonfiction, and we have very similar goals. The glittering prizes in contemporary American society are the glittering prizes. We all know that education and earning money in, as I keep saying, a capitalistic society, and marrying someone who can really be, and this is again why women hold the bar so high in marriage, husband is best friend, lover, soulmate, and we're taught romantic love is essential. And so the glittering prizes, husbands, houses, children, achievement, beauty, materialism, all that we know, and we know it from pop culture, we know it from literature, we know it from being here. We're told in a million ways what we should achieve, right? So yes, it's really important. And when I've interviewed families where the daughter is the first generation in college, and then I get to interview the daughter, her goal is that her daughters will go one day. So we appreciate, the good stuff, and we know that it matters. For families who have had privilege for a while, there is like this requirement, whether it's overt or covert. I agree with you.
So you mentioned gender studies and the role that has played in informing your decisions you've been making in the plots in the book. And can you talk to me a little bit about, and I'm trying not to sound stereotypical as I ask this, will men enjoy this book? Will men be able to connect with this book? Or is it something that you think that, well, I'm just gonna let you answer that. Will men enjoy or connect with this book?
Well, when it comes to my nonfiction, to answer this, I will answer the question because this is part of it. I always say if men would read these books, it would be like a cheat sheet for them, and they would have real insights into how women feel. I know several men who have gotten in touch with me. I know several men have gotten in touch with me after reading it, and have been really very kind about it and said that they loved the drama of it and they identified very closely with Simon and James. And then I should say that there's also a very hip young guy in this story that everyone seems to like, and that is Tyler, and that is Aubrey's new boyfriend, and he's really the conscience of the book. So I do think that, is this, it's funny, I asked my editor when the book was going into production, do you consider this women's fiction? And she said, I do, but more importantly, I consider it dramatic fiction. So in that way, I would love for men to read it as well.
Well, I think that's valuable in, a lot of different media. My husband watches a lot of shows with me that would be, typically considered, chick flicks and things like that. He loves them and gets a lot out of them too. So I
wonderful. And it's really how it should be, right?
Absolutely.
Enlightened.
Yes, absolutely. So besides location, I just want to shift gears a little bit here. Besides location, is there anything else that a Palm Beach wife and a Palm Beach scandal have in common? Is there overlap is it a part two, in other words? Is it a sequel?
So when I spoke with my editor and publisher about starting this trilogy, the series, they called it the Palm Beach novels, and they're standalone. So you could read either one, and there's succinct stories. Now, some secondary characters are in both.
Okay.
And some locations, of course, and some locations are fictive and some are real. And that's that from the beginning. And I'm writing the third in the trilogy now. And that was from the beginning was the template for this novel.
That's good to know. I mean, I was curious because I haven't had the opportunity to read either yet, although I'm very excited to now after having spoken with you.
So they're standalone, but they're of the same place.
Okay, I appreciate knowing that structure a little bit more. So real quickly, this is, and I'm asking this question because we talked about it real briefly before we started the program, and because the previous author who I interviewed also had a pen name. Can you tell us the story about how you came to your pen name and why you decided to go with that?
Well, when I was in college, in my second year of college, my parents came to visit me. And I said to my mother, Mom, look, the writing here, the writing department is great and I'm so happy. And since, I'm going to write books, I was hell-bent, always wanted to be a writer. I said, I'm going to have to change my name because, Susan Rona Shapiro is not that great. And she said to me, no, you can't do that because I thought long and hard about your name. I suspect that might not have been true, but that's what she said. Because look at what she came up with. And she said, and I don't want you to do that. And one day you'll have children. I'm 19. She said, one day you'll have children. You can give them whatever names you want and you'll understand how I feel. And I remember thinking, if I have children, I'll give them, and I told you I have 3, I'll give them great names and they can do whatever they want. But I'm such a good girl, and I always was, that of course I didn't want to upset my mother. And my father said, do not upset your mother with this. Okay. So I write my books, my nonfiction, and I use my father's name, 2 patriarchal names, my family name and my husband's name. And I have a very long name, don't love it, but I use it. And then I want to go back to fiction writing, and where I had earned my master's degree. And I told my agent that I wanted to use a pen name. I had told my mother that I wanted Susannah Marren, because Marren is a family name. I would take the A from Rona, Susanna, it'd be more melodic. And my agent said to me, you can't do that because, you're well known for your nonfiction. And then St. Martin's, my longtime publisher, who publishes both my fiction and my nonfiction, so would you like a pen name? And I said, I have it. So I finally got to use the name many decades later.
Well, that must be very gratifying, though.
It's great. If only I could convince people to call me Susannah.
Well, Susanna, I will always call you Susanna, regardless of the circumstances. It is a beautiful melodic name, like you said. It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat box, but we do have a lovely comment. Betsy says, "Thank you, Susanna. Looking forward to reading your novel and also to looking into your nonfiction gender research." So. I wanted to thank everyone who did come out tonight to hear this, and I want to thank the folks who are watching it on YouTube as well. And most importantly, I want to thank you, Susannah Marren, for taking the time out this evening to tell us about this book that is very fascinating and seems just so much more than, I think my initial guess that it was just, a fun beach read. This has got some heavy stuff in it, and I think it's going to be fascinating on a lot of levels. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for the work that you're doing as a fiction writer and a nonfiction writer. And I hope to have you back for a future book.
It's just delightful to meet you. And I really appreciate that you took the time to come, everyone, and to you, Julia.
Well, we'll have to get you up to Camden, Maine. It's beautiful here. All right, next time. Take care, everyone, and please visit librarycamden.org to find out the latest programs that we have being offered by the Camden Public Library, and look up Susannah Marren and Susanna Shapiro-Bresh online and find out all the books that she's published. All right, take care. Good evening, everyone.
Good night.